The cabin of Flight 998 from New York to Los Angeles hummed with the usual chaos of boarding. First-class passengers, cocooned in luxury, sipped champagne and flipped through glossy magazines. Among them sat Darius Walton, a striking figure in a crisp, tailored navy suit, his presence both commanding and understated. His deep brown skin contrasted elegantly with his white silk shirt, and his custom leather briefcase sat neatly under his seat. Darius, at just 38, was not just any businessman. He was the billionaire CEO of Walton Industries, one of the world's most influential tech companies. As he settled into seat 2A, he opened his tablet, skimming through the latest quarterly reports with practiced precision. The whispers began almost immediately. From the corner of his eye, he noticed a pair of disapproving glances. Roger Stanfield, a wealthy real estate mogul, and his wife Jessica, perfectly coiffed and gleaming with diamond jewelry. They sat directly behind him, accompanied by their 10-year-old daughter Ashley, whose golden curls bounced as she spun around recklessly in her seat. Jessica's lips tightened as she whispered to Roger, loud enough for Darius to hear, "I didn't realize they were letting just anyone in first class these days." Roger chuckled, a smug smirk on his face. "Must be some kind of promotion. Maybe he's a lucky lottery winner," he quipped, eyes gleaming with disdain. Ashley, sensing her parents' disdain, grinned wickedly and leaned forward, pressing her tiny foot against Darius's seat back. With one sharp push, she delivered a kick that jolted him forward. Darius glanced back, offering a polite but firm smile. Jessica merely shrugged and murmured, "Kids will be kids," without even attempting to address her daughter's behavior. Unbothered on the surface, Darius returned to his tablet, but his instincts whispered that this was just the beginning. The whispers, the subtle sneers, and now the child's unchecked rebellion, all pointed to something deeper than mere childish mischief. It was contempt masked by privilege. Darius's jaw tightened subtly, but he forced himself to remain composed. He had faced worse, but something told him this flight would be a test unlike any other. As the plane taxied down the runway, Darius adjusted his posture, attempting to ignore the steady rhythm of kicks pounding against his seat. He could feel his frustration building, but he maintained his usual calm demeanor. In his mind, he went over the presentation he would be delivering to a room full of investors the next morning. Strategies to expand his company's AI division. He wasn't about to let a bratty kid and her entitled parents get under his skin. Another sharp kick jolted him forward, harder this time. Darius closed his eyes, inhaling deeply. Behind him, he could hear Jessica chuckle lightly. "You're so energetic today, sweetheart," she cooed, ruffling Ashley's curls as if rewarding the bad behavior. Roger leaned over and whispered just loud enough for Darius to catch. "Some people just don't know how to handle a little energy. Guess it's not something they're used to." Darius stiffened, recognizing the sneer hidden within those words. A small part of him wanted to turn around and say something, anything to shut down their arrogance. But years of navigating boardrooms and social functions had taught him that silence often speaks louder than confrontation. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction of reacting. But Ashley wasn't done. She grabbed a crumpled napkin, aimed it carefully, and flicked it over the seat, hitting Darius on the shoulder. Jessica stifled a giggle, and Roger didn't even bother hiding his grin. Darius calmly picked up the napkin, set it on his tray, and tried to focus on his tablet. The flight attendant, Samantha Ruiz, moved through the aisle, offering drinks with a practiced smile. Darius politely declined, but as she moved on to Roger and Jessica, he couldn't help but overhear. "Everything all right, sir?" Samantha asked, noticing Roger's pleased expression. "Oh, just enjoying the show," Roger replied with a smirk. "You know how it is. Some people just don't belong up here. Kind of amusing to watch them squirm." Samantha's smile faltered, but she kept her professionalism intact. As she moved further down the aisle, her eyes briefly met Darius's, and he gave her a slight nod, silently telling her to let it go. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed through the cabin as Ashley leaned over the seat and deliberately slapped Darius's head. The entire first-class section fell silent, stunned by the audacity of the child. Darius slowly turned around, eyes narrowing just enough to convey his displeasure. Ashley stuck out her tongue defiantly while Jessica burst out laughing. "Oh, honey, you're too much," she said between giggles. Roger looked down at Darius with an almost triumphant glare. In that moment, Darius made a choice. He would not be their victim. Not here, not now. He slowly stood up, his towering presence casting a shadow over the seats behind him. Jessica's laughter died instantly, and Roger's confident smirk flickered with doubt. Darius bent down to Ashley's eye level, his voice calm but firm. "Respect is something you learn from your parents," he said, making sure both adults heard every word. "If they won't teach you, life will, one way or another." Ashley looked momentarily confused, sensing something deeper beneath his words. Jessica was about to fire back when Samantha reappeared, sensing the tension. "Is everything all right here?" Samantha asked, her voice neutral but cautious. "Oh, just a minor misunderstanding," Roger sneered. "This gentleman seems to have forgotten his place." Samantha shot him a sharp look, clearly appalled by his tone. Darius, refusing to lower himself to their level, straightened up and addressed Samantha directly. "I'm fine. Just dealing with unexpected turbulence," he replied, his tone unwavering. But as Darius sat down, he couldn't help but feel the unmistakable thrum of tension brewing like a storm. He knew that this wasn't just about a spoiled child or even her parents' arrogance. This was about something bigger, something that had been festering in society for far too long. He could feel the stares of other passengers, some sympathetic, some curious, and some quietly complicit. Darius knew one thing. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. As the plane climbed to cruising altitude, Darius tried to regain his composure. He opened his tablet again, attempting to distract himself with financial reports and upcoming project plans. Yet, the throbbing from where Ashley had slapped his head still lingered, a burning reminder of their brazen audacity. His jaw clenched despite his best efforts to stay calm. The air in first class felt thick, like a pressure cooker on the verge of exploding. Darius could hear whispers from other passengers who had witnessed the scene unfold, and while some seemed supportive, others clearly enjoyed the spectacle. The Stanfields remained smug, and Ashley had resumed her relentless kicking of Darius's seat, now even harder than before. Suddenly, a loud electronic blast erupted as Ashley cranked up her tablet volume to the maximum, the shrill noises of a racing game cutting through the air. Darius flinched, rubbing his temple. Roger leaned forward, still smirking. "What's the matter?" he taunted. "Can't handle a little noise? Thought you tech guys were used to loud environments." Darius took a slow breath, remembering every board meeting where he'd had to control his temper in the face of condescension. As he opened his mouth to respond, Jessica leaned in conspiratorially. "You know," she whispered loudly enough for several rows to hear, "some people just aren't made for first class. It's obvious when they don't fit the ambiance, but you know how it is. Some folks are just lucky enough to sneak in." Darius turned his head just enough to catch her glare. "Luck has nothing to do with it," he said calmly, locking eyes with her. "But respect, that seems to be something you're not familiar with." Jessica's face twisted with offense. She opened her mouth to retort when Roger cut in, his voice louder and more menacing. "Don't you dare talk to my wife like that," he snapped. "Who do you think you are? You should be grateful they even let you sit up here." Darius felt the rage boiling beneath his composed exterior. Before he could reply, Samantha appeared, sensing the escalating tension. "Is everything all right here?" she asked, her tone polite but wary. Roger immediately pounced. "Absolutely not. This man is harassing my wife and making our daughter uncomfortable. I demand he be moved, preferably to economy where he belongs." Samantha's eyes widened, but before she could respond, another voice interjected. A tall, elegantly dressed woman from the opposite aisle, her gaze icy and piercing. "That's not what happened," she said firmly. "I've been watching the whole thing. Your daughter has been kicking his seat since takeoff, and both of you have been goading him the entire time. Perhaps it's you who should be moved." Roger's face flushed crimson. "Mind your business, lady." The Stanfields froze, their faces draining of color as they processed the information. Roger spluttered, trying to recover. Walton Industries?" Darius leaned back in his seat, allowing himself a faint smile. "That's right," he said smoothly. "I'm Darius Walton, CEO, and I'm here on business, though I suppose it's not really your concern." Jessica's eyes widened with panic, and Roger's mouth hung open in shock. Ashley, oblivious to the gravity of the situation, continued blasting her game. Samantha looked between them, unsure whether to intervene. Victoria pressed on, her gaze unwavering. "If you continue to disrupt Mr. Walton's flight experience, I'll personally see to it that you're escorted off at the nearest layover, and I'll make sure your behavior is documented with the airline's VIP services team." Roger blustered, trying to regain his composure. "This is ridiculous. You can't threaten us like that." "Oh, it's not a threat," Victoria said with a dangerous smile. "It's a promise. And if you're thinking of making a complaint, just remember, you're on a plane full of witnesses, including me." For the first time since boarding, Roger fell silent, his expression a mix of humiliation and barely concealed rage. Jessica shrank back, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Darius glanced at Victoria and gave a small nod of appreciation. Samantha, sensing the tide had turned, spoke up, her voice more assertive now. "Sir, ma'am," she addressed the Stanfields, "if there are any further disruptions, I will have to involve the captain. Please ensure your daughter remains seated and quiet for the remainder of the flight." Roger wanted to retort, but the combined authority of Victoria, Samantha, and the collective judgment of the other passengers pinned him down. Gritting his teeth, he yanked Ashley's tablet away, lowering the volume. The child pouted but dared not protest under her father's glare. The tension in the cabin seemed to deflate, but the ripple of murmurs continued. Darius took a slow, controlled breath, feeling the surge of power shift in his favor. Victoria returned to her seat, her posture regal and poised. As she passed, she gave Darius a discreet nod of solidarity. "Thank you," Darius whispered. She gave him a knowing smile. "People like them need to be put in their place sometimes. Let me know if they start up again." With the situation finally under control, Samantha moved to the galley, whispering to her colleague about the unexpected power play that had just unfolded. Meanwhile, Darius glanced back one more time at the Stanfields, now subdued and visibly shaken. It wasn't the victory he had wanted, but it was the victory he needed. Darius knew he couldn't change every mind or heart, but sometimes it only took one bold voice to challenge arrogance and make a difference. He just hadn't expected it to come from someone as fierce and confident as Victoria King. As the plane soared westward, Darius allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. For the first time that flight, he felt the burden on his shoulders lighten, if only just a little. With the cabin settling into an uneasy calm, Darius finally allowed himself a moment to breathe. The noise from Ashley's game had ceased, and Roger sat stiffly in his seat, his jaw clenched in frustration. Jessica, still red-faced, fussed over Ashley's curls, murmuring reassurances that only served to stroke the child's inflated sense of self-importance. Samantha made another pass through the aisle, deliberately pausing near Darius to offer him a fresh glass of water. "I apologize for the earlier disruption, Mr. Walton," she said softly, a hint of genuine remorse in her tone. "No need," Darius replied, accepting the drink. "You handled it well." Just as Samantha nodded and moved on, Roger leaned forward, his voice low and venomous. "You think you're so special, huh?" he sneered. "You and your little entourage of corporate lapdogs? Just because you got a fancy title doesn't mean you belong here. You're still just—" "Sir," Victoria's voice cut in sharply from across the aisle. "I'd be very careful about what you're about to say." Roger froze mid-sentence, his face contorting with barely concealed rage. He knew he was treading on dangerous ground, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. Jessica, sensing the escalation, tried to nudge him to sit back, but he jerked his arm away. "That's the problem with people like you," Roger spat, his voice low but seething. "You walk around like you're better than everyone else. Think you can buy your way into respect. But people like me, we built this country. You're just riding the wave." Darius didn't respond immediately, but his silence spoke volumes. Victoria was about to speak up again when Darius raised a hand, signaling her to hold back. He turned slowly, his gaze locked onto Roger's eyes, calm yet piercing. "Respect isn't bought," Darius said evenly. "It's earned, and from where I'm sitting, it's pretty clear who's lacking it." Roger barked a harsh laugh, but it sounded hollow. "You think money changes what you are? You can dress up in a $1,000 suit and buy every luxury in the world, but you'll never." Enough. It wasn't Darius who spoke, nor Victoria. It was an older gentleman seated diagonally from Roger, Colonel Henry Prescott, a decorated war veteran, his uniform gleaming with medals. The entire cabin seemed to still as his gravelly voice filled the space. "I've been listening to your nonsense long enough," the colonel said, eyes narrowed at Roger. "I've fought in 3 wars and served this country for 40 years. I've led men of every race, creed, and color. And let me tell you something, son. None of them ever showed the kind of disrespect you just did. You're an embarrassment to every decent American on this plane." Roger paled visibly, his bravado crumbling under the colonel's piercing glare. Jessica looked mortified, while Ashley shrank back, finally realizing that the tide had turned against them. The colonel turned to Darius, his expression softening. "I recognize you from the news, son. Your company's been funding rehabilitation tech for veterans. You've done a lot of good for people who sacrificed more than you'll ever know, Mr. Stanfield." He gave Roger a scornful look. "You could learn a thing or two from him about respect and decency." The cabin erupted into scattered applause, some passengers murmuring their agreement. Roger clenched his fists but stayed silent, too stunned to respond. Jessica's cheeks burned with humiliation as she glared at her husband, furious that his arrogance had publicly disgraced them. Victoria shot Darius a triumphant glance, and he couldn't help but give her a grateful nod. Samantha, taking advantage of the moment, approached Roger and Jessica with a stern expression. "I'm issuing a formal report about your behavior," she informed them. "And given your disruptive conduct, the airline may choose to blacklist you from future first-class reservations." Roger opened his mouth to protest, but Jessica elbowed him sharply, silently begging him not to make it worse. Defeated and fuming, he slumped back into his seat, muttering curses under his breath. As the tension eased and the plane continued its smooth course to Los Angeles, Darius glanced out the window, reflecting on how quickly the situation had spiraled. He knew that no amount of wealth or success could shield him from people like Roger, but today had reminded him that allies could appear when least expected, sometimes in the form of a fierce corporate executive and a battle-hardened war veteran. Leaning back in his seat, Darius couldn't help but feel a surge of unexpected pride, not just in himself for maintaining his composure, but in the strangers who had stood up to injustice without hesitation. For once, the burden hadn't been his alone to bear. As the plane continued westward, he allowed himself a rare moment of hope. That maybe, just maybe, the world wasn't as indifferent as it seemed. The air inside the first-class cabin remained thick with tension, but the power dynamic had undeniably shifted. Roger sat back, his jaw clenched, eyes blazing with a mixture of shame and fury. Jessica pretended to focus on a fashion magazine, though her hands trembled as she turned the pages. Ashley, no longer kicking or causing trouble, sulked in her seat, the weight of public scorn finally sinking in. Darius allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. It wasn't often that someone like Roger was forced to confront his own arrogance. But the feeling was short-lived. Darius couldn't shake the sense that something darker was still simmering beneath the surface. He had seen too many men like Roger, men who couldn't stand to be outdone, especially by a successful black man. As Samantha moved through the aisle offering more drinks, she gave Darius a reassuring smile. He returned it with a nod, but his instincts told him to stay alert. Roger didn't seem like the type to just let things go. A few minutes later, while the cabin had settled into relative calm, Darius noticed Roger furiously tapping on his phone. Jessica leaned in, whispering sharply, and Roger hissed back, too low to hear. Darius's curiosity piqued, but he didn't want to overthink it. Instead, he refocused on his tablet, immersing himself in the latest financial projections. Then, without warning, Roger stood up abruptly, pushing past Samantha as she tried to calm him down. He strode toward the cockpit door, his face flushed and eyes wild. Before anyone could react, Roger began pounding on the door, yelling, "I need to speak to the captain, now!" Passengers exchanged worried glances, and Samantha rushed forward, her professional demeanor cracking. "Sir, you need to return to your seat immediately," she insisted, trying to block his path. Roger ignored her completely, shouting louder. "This man," he gestured wildly toward Darius, "is dangerous. I don't feel safe with him on this plane." A murmur of confusion rippled through the cabin, and Darius felt his stomach drop. He knew where this was going, and he braced himself for the storm. Colonel Prescott, still sitting nearby, shot to his feet. "What the hell are you doing, son?" he barked. "You're acting like a goddamn lunatic." Roger, seizing on the chaos he had created, spun around and pointed at Darius with a shaking finger. "You don't understand. I saw him acting suspicious. He's been on his phone sending secret messages. I think he's planning something dangerous." Darius's eyes widened in disbelief. This was no longer just a racist tantrum. Roger was trying to paint him as a threat, a terrorist. It was a classic tactic, weaponize fear and prejudice to turn people against him. Passengers glanced nervously at Darius, unsure what to believe. The old fear was surfacing, the same fear that black men like him had been forced to navigate for generations. Darius swallowed his anger, knowing that losing his temper now would only feed into Roger's twisted narrative. Samantha firmly placed herself between Roger and the cockpit door. "Sir, you're causing a scene," she said, her voice stern. "Return to your seat now, or I will have to alert the captain." Roger scoffed, his chest heaving. "You're just defending him because you don't want to admit it. You're putting us all in danger?" At that moment, Victoria rose from her seat and fixed Roger with a cold, unflinching stare. "You're out of your mind," she said sharply. "If you don't sit down right now, I will personally ensure that Walton Industries presses charges for defamation and harassment." Roger hesitated, his bluster. Suddenly the intercom crackled to life. "This is Captain Reynolds," a firm, authoritative voice announced. "We've been made aware of a disturbance in first class. Please remain calm and seated. We will address the issue shortly." Roger's face paled as the realization sank in that he might have pushed too far. Samantha took advantage of the pause to place a hand on his arm. "Sir, come with me to the galley," she said firmly. "Now." Reluctantly, Roger allowed himself to be led away, his indignation deflating. Jessica sat frozen, unwilling to meet anyone's gaze. Victoria shot Darius a glance that said, "This isn't over." Colonel Prescott shook his head in disgust. "Coward?" he muttered under his breath. Darius took a deep breath, calming the fire that threatened to ignite within him. He could see the fear and uncertainty in some of the passengers' eyes. Roger had planted seeds of doubt, and Darius knew that the damage couldn't be undone with just words. Victoria leaned over and whispered, "We're going to make sure he doesn't get away with this. I'm texting my legal team right now. This kind of accusation can't go unanswered." Darius nodded, grateful for her support, but as he looked around, he couldn't help but feel the weight of suspicion that still lingered in the air. Roger's ploy might have been desperate and unfounded, but it had struck a chord, exploiting a fear that society hadn't yet purged. Darius knew he wasn't just fighting Roger, he was fighting an entire mindset. And as the plane hurtled through the sky, he steeled himself for the next battle, determined to hold his ground and reclaim his dignity, no matter the cost. With Roger finally ushered away to the galley, the cabin seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. Yet, an uneasy tension still gripped the atmosphere. Darius could feel eyes on him, some supportive, some skeptical, and others unsure. He remained seated, his face an impassive mask, though his mind was racing. He knew men like Roger wouldn't go down without a fight. The challenge was far from over. Victoria, ever the strategist, slid into the seat across from Darius, her voice low and calculating. He's playing a dangerous game. Accusing you of being a threat? That's not just petty racism, that's outright malicious intent. I've already contacted my legal team. They'll meet us when we land. Darius nodded, appreciating her support, but he remained quiet. His instincts told him that this was about more than just ego. Roger's desperation seemed calculated. Why go so far? Why risk making such a public scene without a guarantee of winning? Something wasn't adding up. Samantha returned looking shaken but professional as always. She leaned down, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Walton, Captain Reynolds wants you to know that he's handling the situation. We've locked Roger in the galley for now to keep him away from the passengers. I just wanted to assure you that we are on your side. Darius offered her a grateful nod. Thanks, Samantha. I appreciate it. Suddenly, his phone buzzed with an alert. He glanced at the screen and felt his stomach drop. An article headline flashed across the screen. Breaking tech mogul, Darius Walton accused of mid-flight disruption. Alleged threat to passenger safety. What the hell? Victoria hissed, peering over his shoulder. Darius quickly opened the link, scrolling through the hastily written piece. It quoted an anonymous source who claimed that Walton had been acting suspiciously during the flight and that his behavior had alarmed fellow passengers. Darius's hands tightened around his phone, fury building inside him. Roger hadn't just tried to humiliate him. He had planned this. Somehow, the media had been prepped to spin the story before the plane even landed. This was a setup, Darius muttered. That son of a bitch planned this from the start. Victoria's mind raced, piecing it together. He's leveraging your reputation against you, trying to ruin your image while making himself look like the concerned citizen. Typical corporate sabotage, but with a racial twist. He wants you disgraced. Just then, Colonel Prescott appeared beside them, his expression grim. I just heard from Samantha. That bastard's on the phone back there. Seems he's got a contact feeding the story to the media. He's not just some angry passenger, he's got a vendetta. Darius exhaled slowly, trying to rein in his anger. It makes sense now. He must have known I was on this flight. This isn't random. He's trying to destroy me publicly. Victoria's eyes narrowed. If he's feeding false stories to the media while still on the plane, we can nail him for defamation. I'll have my PR team issue a counterstatement before we land. Damage control starts now. A voice echoed through the cabin, drawing everyone's attention. It was Captain Reynolds speaking through the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We have experienced a disturbance on board and have taken necessary precautions to ensure your safety. We ask that you remain calm and cooperative. Authorities will be present upon landing to assess the situation. Thank you for your understanding. Passengers whispered to one another, their curiosity piqued. Darius could feel the weight of their stares, some suspicious, some sympathetic, but all undeniably curious. He knew that whatever happened next would shape his public image for years to come. Victoria's phone vibrated and she glanced at the screen. My team's already on it. They're drafting a press release to counter the accusations. We'll pin him as a malicious agitator, driven by racial bias and jealousy. This won't ruin you, Darius. I promise, Darius gave her a thin, grateful smile. Thanks, Victoria. I owe you one. No, she replied firmly. You don't owe anyone anything. You've earned your place through hard work and genius. That man's just trying to tear you down because he can't stand seeing someone like you succeed. We'll expose him for what he is. A bitter, small-minded bigot. Colonel Prescott nodded in agreement. You let me know if you need a witness statement. I'll vouch for you every step of the way. Darius felt a surge of gratitude, but his heart remained heavy. He knew that Roger's plan had been meticulously calculated, designed to weaponize public perception and force him into a defensive position. It was classic power play. Use racial bias to erode credibility and weaponize media influence. But what Roger didn't count on was Darius's resilience and the unexpected allies who had rallied to his side. This fight wasn't just about one flight or one man. It was about standing up to systemic prejudice and refusing to be silenced. As the plane began its descent, Darius steeled himself for the confrontation ahead. One way or another, he would reclaim his dignity, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been unjustly targeted and falsely accused. He glanced at Victoria and Colonel Prescott, both of whom gave him resolute nods. Darius knew that whatever awaited him on the ground, he wouldn't be facing it alone. The truth would come out, and Roger Stanfield would regret ever trying to ruin him. As Flight 998 descended toward Los Angeles, tension lingered thick in the air. Darius felt the gravity of the situation bearing down on him, but he remained composed, his mind already calculating the moves he'd make once they landed. His phone buzzed again, this time with a message from his own PR chief. We've seen the article. Do you need legal support on landing? Coordinating with local authorities now. He typed back quickly, yes. Make sure media outlets know the truth. Confirm my identity and reputation. Prepare to counter false claims. Victoria leaned closer, keeping her voice low. My team's already compiling his business records. If he's linked to any competitors of Walton Industries, we'll have proof of motive. This isn't just petty racism, it's a calculated hit. Colonel Prescott grunted in agreement. Damn right. That snake didn't just pick a fight. He's trying to end your career. We can't let that stand. The plane landed with a smooth touch, but tension rose again as Captain Reynolds' voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated as authorities will be boarding the plane shortly. Thank you for your cooperation. The murmurs from passengers grew louder, some curious, others anxious. Darius knew the spectacle wasn't over yet. From his vantage point, he could see police officers and airline security gathering on the tarmac. Samantha appeared at his side, her expression worried but supportive. Mr. Walton, Captain Reynolds would like to speak with you before you disembark. He's coordinating with the authorities to clear up any misunderstandings. Thank you, Samantha, Darius replied calmly. Let's get this sorted out. As Darius stood, Roger reappeared, escorted out of the galley by another flight attendant. His face was flushed, his eyes wild with a mix of triumph and vindictive fury. You think your money and power can cover this up? Roger sneered. I've got friends on the ground waiting. They know what you did. You'll never get out of this. Darius didn't bother responding. Instead, he walked past Roger, letting his silence speak volumes. As he reached the cockpit, Captain Reynolds greeted him with a firm handshake. Mr. Walton, I assure you we're handling this. I've spoken to the authorities and given a full account of the disturbance. They've been briefed that this was a false accusation. Darius nodded appreciatively. Thank you, Captain. Just want to make sure the truth prevails. Absolutely, Reynolds replied. That man back there made multiple calls during the flight, leaking false information to the media. We have recordings from the cockpit that will prove it. Rest assured, he's not walking away from this unscathed. The gravity of the situation settled in as two police officers boarded the plane. One approached Darius with a respectful nod. Mr. Walton, we're here to ensure your safety and get your statement. We're aware of the situation and will be escorting you off the plane first to avoid confrontation. Roger's voice erupted from behind them. Are you kidding me? You're arresting me? He's the threat. He's the criminal. One of the officers, a tall woman with piercing blue eyes, turned sharply. Sir, we have evidence that you made false reports to the media during the flight, intentionally inciting panic. You're being detained for questioning. Roger's face drained of color. This is a mistake! You can't do this! He's the problem! Jessica, holding Ashley's hand tightly, looked on in horror as her husband was placed in handcuffs. The flight attendants guided the other passengers to remain seated, maintaining order despite the chaos. As Darius moved down the aisle to exit, Colonel Prescott gave him a firm nod of approval, and Victoria squeezed his shoulder reassuringly. Outside, the flashing lights of media cameras illuminated the tarmac, but Darius walked with his head held high. The officers kept the reporters at bay while escorting him to a private car arranged by Victoria's team. As he climbed in, his phone buzzed with dozens of notifications. News stories were already shifting in tone, highlighting Roger's malicious accusations and Darius's unblemished reputation. Victoria joined him in the car, closing the door behind her. Your team just put out a statement, highlighting your philanthropic work and exposing Roger's fabricated claims. The public's on your side now. He's done. Darius exhaled slowly, the weight of the ordeal finally lifting from his shoulders. It's not just about me. It's about how easily lies can be weaponized against people like us. We can't let that go unchecked. Victoria nodded. We won't. This is just the beginning. We're going to push for an investigation into his business dealings. There's no way he pulled this stunt alone. As the car sped away from the airport, Darius allowed himself a rare smile. He knew the battle was far from over, but he had allies. Powerful. The car glided smoothly through the Los Angeles streets as Darius sat back, his mind still processing the whirlwind of events. Victoria was on her phone, issuing rapid instructions to her PR and legal teams. The cool night air wafted in through the slightly cracked window, bringing a sense of calm after the storm. But just as Darius felt the tension ease, Victoria suddenly froze mid-sentence, her face turning serious. She ended the call and looked at him, her expression a mix of concern and determination. What's wrong? Darius asked. She took a deep breath. We just found something unexpected. My team dug into Roger Stanfield's business connections. He's not just some random real estate mogul. He's heavily invested in a tech startup that's been trying to outbid Walton Industries for a massive government contract. Darius's eyes narrowed. You're saying this whole thing was a setup to ruin my reputation and give his company the upper hand? Victoria nodded grimly. Exactly. His company, Whitecrest Technologies, has been aggressively courting the Department of Defense for a high-profile contract on AI-driven security systems. Your company is their only real competition. If your reputation takes a hit, it could sway the decision in their favor. The realization hit Darius like a gut punch. Roger hadn't just been driven by personal prejudice. He had orchestrated the entire situation to cripple Walton Industries. It was ruthless, calculated, and diabolical. Victoria's phone buzzed again. She glanced at the screen and then put it on speaker. It's my legal advisor, Christine, she explained. Victoria, I have more intel, Christine said. Turns out Whitecrest Technologies recently received a substantial investment from a shadow firm, Orion Holdings. We traced it back to a known rival of Walton Industries, Sovereign Capital. This goes way deeper than just Stanfield. Darius clenched his jaw, fury simmering beneath his composed exterior. They knew I was going to be on that flight. They planned this ambush to destroy my credibility before the government made their decision. Victoria nodded. It's corporate sabotage disguised as a racial provocation. They knew they could manipulate public perception with one strategic incident, but they didn't count on you having allies or keeping your composure under fire. Darius leaned forward, his voice low and resolute. We're going to expose every single one of them. If Sovereign Capital thinks they can pull this off without consequences, they're sorely mistaken. Start the counteroffensive. I want every dirty deal uncovered. Dig into Roger's finances, his personal life, everything. Victoria gave a wicked smile. Already on it. We'll leak his shady business practices to the press before dawn. He'll be ruined before he even makes bail. Just then, Darius's phone buzzed. It was a text from Captain Reynolds. Roger just confessed everything to the police. He's blaming Whitecrest and Sovereign for pressuring him to create the scene. Looks like he's trying to cut a deal. Authorities are investigating. Darius let out a slow, victorious breath. He's crumbling. They used him as a pawn, and now he's trying to save himself by throwing them under the bus. Victoria smirked. Cowardly to the end. Let him talk. He'll give us everything we need to dismantle their entire operation. Darius looked out at the sparkling Los Angeles skyline, a sense of justice coursing through him. I'll make sure the media knows the full story, how greed and corporate sabotage nearly ruined me. They tried to weaponize my race and my success against me, but they underestimated one thing. What's that? Victoria asked, arching a brow. He looked at her with unwavering determination. I don't just fight to win. I fight to expose the truth. As they pulled up to his penthouse building, Victoria turned to him one last time. You've been fighting battles like this your whole life, haven't you? Darius gave her a small, wry smile. It's never easy, but I learned a long time ago that if I let them beat me down once, they'll never stop. So I keep standing, no matter how hard they hit. Victoria nodded, admiration shining in her eyes. You're not just a survivor, Darius. You're a force to be reckoned with, and we're going to take them all down, one step at a time. Darius watched the city lights flicker like 1,000 tiny fires in the dark, each one representing a story of resilience and resistance. He knew this fight was far from over, but with allies like Victoria by his side, he was ready to face whatever came next. The next morning, the media storm hit like a tidal wave. News outlets across the country were broadcasting breaking updates, and Darius Walton's name was everywhere. Only this time, the narrative had flipped entirely. Racist smear campaign exposed, billionaire CEO targeted in malicious plot. Rogue executive arrested after trying to sabotage Walton Industries. Hero flight attendant and decorated veteran stand up to corporate conspiracy. Victoria's PR team had done their job brilliantly, and the truth spread like wildfire. Video footage from the plane, captured by passengers, showed Roger's unhinged behavior, his false accusations, and Colonel Prescott's unwavering support for Darius. Statements from Captain Reynolds and Samantha corroborated the story, and interviews with witnesses made it clear that Roger had been the instigator all along. Social media exploded with support for Darius, praising his composure and dignity in the face of blatant provocation. Tweets and posts under hashtags like #Stand with Darius and Justice for Walton trended worldwide. Sitting in his office, Darius watched the coverage unfold on the massive wall-mounted screen. Victoria stood nearby, pacing as her phone buzzed with updates. She stopped abruptly when Christine called, putting it on speaker. "We've got him," Christine announced triumphantly. Roger folded completely. He's giving up Sovereign Capital, Whitecrest, and all their dirty dealings. He even admitted they promised him a massive payout if he could destroy your public image. They fed him your flight schedule, coached him on how to provoke you, and planned the media leak in advance. Victoria grinned like a lioness who'd just cornered her prey. That's exactly what we needed. Have the legal team draft the lawsuit. We're going after every single one of them. Corporate sabotage, defamation, racial discrimination. The works. Christine's voice was crisp with satisfaction. Already in motion, also the Department of Justice is launching an investigation into Sovereign Capital and Whitecrest. They're panicking. Stock prices are plummeting. Darius couldn't help but smile, but his expression remained thoughtful. This isn't just about me. They were willing to manipulate racial tensions and weaponize public perception for profit. We need to make sure this sets a precedent. They can't just pay a fine and walk away. Victoria nodded firmly. We're not letting them off the hook. Public pressure is mounting, people are demanding accountability, and no amount of corporate spin can change the facts. Sovereign Capital is in free fall. I doubt their CEO will last the week. Darius allowed himself a deep breath of relief. Finally, the tides had turned. He glanced at his phone, noticing a message from Samantha. "Thank you for standing strong. You've inspired more people than you realize. Proud to have met you." He smiled and replied, "The courage you showed made all the difference. Thank you for having my back." Just then, his assistant buzzed through the intercom. "Mr. Walton, your sister Amara is here." Darius stood up, and a moment later, Amara strode in, her eyes blazing with both anger and pride. "You really know how to make headlines, big brother," she teased, but her voice carried a note of genuine concern. He pulled her into a hug, grateful for her support. "You know me, always keeping life interesting." She pulled back, giving him a stern look. "You okay?" "I saw the footage. That man tried to ruin you. I wanted to fly out and kick his ass myself. We're going to make sure the whole system gets a wake-up call." Amara raised her hand for a high five, and Darius slapped it with a grin. "That's right. No more playing it safe. If they want to fight, they're about to get one." The media continued to buzz with updates and new revelations as Darius glanced at the screen one last time. His reputation wasn't just restored, it was fortified. The world had seen him maintain his dignity while his enemies unraveled. And with each passing hour, the conspiracy that tried to destroy him crumbled even further. But this victory wasn't just personal. It was a statement, a line drawn in the sand. Darius Walton was no one's victim, and neither were the countless others who faced prejudice and sabotage daily. As he stood by the window, watching the city pulse with life, he knew that the battle was far from over, but he also knew that he wasn't fighting it alone anymore. The truth had prevailed, and the world was watching. It was time to reshape the narrative, not just for himself, but for everyone who needed to know that they could stand tall in the face of injustice. A week had passed since the incident on Flight 998, but the aftermath still rippled through the media like shockwaves. Darius Walton's victory had become a symbol of resilience and dignity in the face of blatant racism and corporate sabotage. Yet amid the triumph, there remained an uncomfortable truth: the ease with which racial bias had been weaponized to tear him down. Sitting at his desk, Darius scrolled through countless messages, support from colleagues, grateful words from young black entrepreneurs who saw him as an inspiration, and heartfelt letters from people who had faced similar struggles. Yet, beneath the surface of victory, an unsettling thought gnawed at him. If he hadn't been a billionaire, if he hadn't had powerful allies like Victoria and Colonel Prescott, would he have survived the attack on his reputation? His thoughts were interrupted by a phone call from Victoria. "Darius, turn on the news, now." Her voice was urgent, almost breathless. He switched on the large wall screen where a familiar face appeared: Roger Stanfield, disheveled and cuffed, being led into a courthouse. Reporters shouted questions, but Roger's words cut through the noise like a blade. "I was just doing what I was told," he yelled. "They set me up too. They said it was just business. They knew people would believe it because he's black." A heavy silence filled the room as Darius stared at the screen, his heart pounding. Victoria's voice crackled through the phone. "He just admitted it. They manipulated public bias, betting on society's inherent racism to destroy you. They planned it down to the last detail. Sovereign capital and Whitecrest banked on America's willingness to doubt and degrade a successful black man." Darius clenched his fists, his jaw tight with fury. It wasn't just about one man's hatred, it was a calculated exploitation of systemic prejudice. They knew that society would rather believe a rich black man was a threat than acknowledge his success. Taking a deep breath, he turned to Victoria. "We're not just going to win this lawsuit. We're going to push for federal charges, conspiracy, corporate misconduct, hate crimes, and I'm going public with the truth. This isn't just about me anymore, it's about exposing how racism is weaponized in every aspect of our lives." Victoria's voice softened, but her resolve was clear. "We'll make them pay, Darius. Not just in court, but in the court of public opinion. The world needs to know how deep this rot goes." Darius nodded, determination burning in his eyes. "We're not just clearing my name. We're fighting to change the narrative for every black person who's ever been torn down for daring to succeed. They want to use our success as a weapon against us? Fine. Let's turn that weapon back on them. Let's shatter the illusion that power and privilege can silence the truth." As the sun dipped behind the skyline, casting long shadows across his office, Darius felt a new sense of purpose surge within him. This battle was far from over, but it would be fought not just for his own vindication, but for a future where no one could manipulate prejudice for profit. The world needed to see the reality, raw, unfiltered, and unafraid, and Darius Walton would make sure they did. The story of Darius Walton is more than just a tale of a billionaire fighting against corporate sabotage and racial prejudice. It is a profound reflection on the human spirit, the power of resilience, and the deep-rooted issues of racial bias that continue to plague society. One of the most valuable lessons from this narrative is the importance of maintaining dignity and composure in the face of injustice. Darius's ability to remain calm while enduring relentless provocation highlights a powerful message. True strength lies not only in fighting back, but in refusing to be reduced by the hatred of others. His composure and refusal to stoop to the level of his accusers challenge the deeply ingrained stereotypes that seek to undermine black excellence. This story sheds light on how deeply racism is embedded within our social fabric, where a successful black man's accomplishments are often questioned, and his reputation can be easily threatened by malicious intent. The beauty of human nature, however, emerges through the allies who stood by Darius, Victoria, Colonel Prescott, Samantha, and even ordinary passengers who dared to speak up. Their willingness to challenge injustice exemplifies the potential for collective courage to dismantle prejudice. This unity of diverse individuals underlines the importance of standing together against discrimination, showing that empathy and solidarity can overcome even the most calculated attempts at defamation. It also reminds us that standing up for what is right, even when it's uncomfortable, is essential for social progress. Furthermore, the story addresses the toxicity of using race as a weapon to destroy success. It critiques not just the actions of one hateful individual, but an entire system that easily buys into harmful narratives without scrutiny. It calls upon society to reflect on its biases and challenge the tendency to view black success as inherently suspicious. Culturally, Darius's journey emphasizes the significance of maintaining pride in one's achievements, regardless of societal doubts or prejudices. It demonstrates the resilience of black professionals who navigate spaces where their success is often met with disdain rather than respect. Above all, this story calls for introspection on how easily perceptions can be manipulated and how critical it is to foster a culture of critical thinking and compassion. It challenges the reader to reject apathy, to actively counter racial biases, and to nurture a culture of dignity, respect, and solidarity. The narrative not only showcases the ugliness of racism, but also the transformative power of allies and the human capacity to rise above hatred. Through Darius Walton's story, we learn that real change requires both individual courage and collective commitment to justice and equality.